Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at a variety of books from the Best Left Buried line of old school D&D books. So these are created by Zachary Cox along with a number of other contributors. And I have a variety of them here. So we're going to kind of take a tour through them to see what some of the books in this line look like. In the past, I previously reviewed just the core rules of it. So we're going to look at what else you can get from this series. And it does seem to be turning into quite a substantial series. A lot of new adventures are coming out for this particular system. So let's look at this big book here first. So this is kind of the deluxe edition of Best Left Buried, which is a horror role-playing game in a minimalist old school D&D sort of framework. The beginning of this book is the rules that we have looked at before. So I'm not really going to go through those again. You can check out my original rules review up here at the top if you would like to see that. Essentially, there is the rules book. There is a section for the game master, and then there's another book that is just expanded character options. And this thing is all three of those things packed together. I found it a little bit annoying that the book doesn't say that. It doesn't say that this is a compilation of these three other particular books. At least I didn't see that written down anywhere. So it took me a little while to figure that out for myself. But this does combine several other books that you can get. I'll put a link down below to where you can get those. So where should we start here? We got all the way down through, for example, monsters. Let's say around 79 is where some of the new content starts. Or right around here, running the game. So this gets into game mastering advice. So what is fun in Best Left Buried? Especially trying to get fun out of the more horrific aspects of horror role-playing and how to challenge players. A lot of great advice in here. It's mostly very succinctly stated. And it's just very concrete and practical in a way that a lot of Game Master advice columns aren't. One thing that bugs me a little bit, and this was true, I think, also in the original rule set, is that it's just a typographical thing, but everything is justified and the typeface is kind of large. So you are always running into these giant gaps between words, and they're pretty common. They're kind of all throughout the whole thing. So either shrinking the text size or maybe just doing things with ragged edges would have solved that, I think. Or maybe just doing, breaking up words more with hyphens. Section on the crypt and running things underground. Some great ideas of other starting points for if you want to grab a pre-written old school adventure. And we know where to start from. You start with your idea, and then how do you build on that? What kind of monsters and factions are in there? How are you going to stock up your rooms? Ways to spice up your dungeon. That's a really useful random table. Civilization and the wilderness. How to run dangerous areas that aren't just boring and aggravating. A lot of this ties into the general old school principles of giving players enough information that they can solve things. Right? You can have rules or you can have traps and dungeons that are internally consistent, where you can see why the person who made the dungeon designed it that way, but which are almost impossible for players to figure out. So they just wander through and they just kind of die, and it's tense, I suppose, but also really boring at the same time because there's no way for them to really succeed. So it's all about giving your players information, giving them lots of clues so that when they fail, they can see where they went wrong. And so I really agree with a lot of the advice in here. Section on how to make some monsters. Monster stats. Lots of good monster adaptions here that you can plug and play into any monster, including stuff from other rule systems. How to create non-mechanical threats. I really like that idea. So monsters that are more maneuverable, that have factions, that are hard to find, etc. You're not just boosting up their numbers, you're altering the way that they play and the kinds of problems that they present to the players. Lots of good random tables here, where you can alter the moods of your monsters so that they're not all thinking and acting the same way. Section on rewards and treasures. Look at magic items, monstrous treasures. Good random table here for lots of mortal treasures. For example, a shoe that always fits, or a compass that points toward the nearest quantity of spilt blood. So they're dubiously useful, right? They're just minor items. But if you are a clever player, you're probably going to find some way to turn that to your advantage. So we actually have a setting here for the Best Left Buried series. I'm always sort of, on the fence about this sort of thing. I do like reading settings, especially if they're really dense and evocative, but I feel like you should either go one way or another. You should either just go full on lore book where you're getting tons of information and you're just making reading the setting really enjoyable, or you should make it super minimal. This is kind of in the middle, where I'm not sure how much of it I would really use. Because there's a couple of good ideas in here, but it's sparse enough that I would probably have to make most of it myself. I think I would prefer just lots of little pieces of information that were very evocative and distinct, or even random tables, to get me going so that I would make my own stuff. Some gods and religion that you can steal for Best Left Buried. Fashion that crypt diggers might have. The camp. So there's a system where you're in basically a mercenary company of hundreds of people. And these crypt digger companies have their own specific cultures and traditions. And a lot of them are really neat. I actually kind of like that. It's a very different framework from which to launch expeditions and to think about D&D adventuring. Urban mishap tables. So, if you go carousing, lots of good tables for that. And the carousing can help generate new story hooks. It adds new information to the setting. Lord Edmund's Barrow. So we get a complete dungeon right here, all done on one page. Excellent. I love it when we have one-page dungeons where you have everything on one page. There's no flipping involved. You can just see where you are, and then you can see the details about that room right next to it. This does lend itself to very minimal descriptions, which has, its upsides and its downsides, but in terms of ease of use, it's really great. We have level 2 of this dungeon and details of some of the monsters that we find here. And then some demi-human archetypes at the back if you want to create dwarves, elves, and small folk. Since I believe the standard here is to be a human. Now, some of the other stuff that we have for Best Left Buried includes some adventures. For example, this one, The Touch of the Beast, which I thought was pretty funny as a concept, since it is taking the castle from Beauty and the Beast and turning it into a Dungeons and Dragons type adventure. So it takes place during the French Revolution. We're going to go take out those aristocrats, but this aristocrat is a beast. So this is, the words are by Giuliano Roverato, Gustavo Nassar, and Rodrigo Melchior. One thing I noticed right away is that the title at the top is misspelled. This is The Touch of the Best, so there might need to be a bit more proofreading. Now, the actual layout of this is fairly basic. There isn't a lot of illustrations, but I will walk through some of the things that I really like about the way that this is designed. For one thing, details are always done in these black boxes. So basically, this is stuff that players can find out pretty quickly, and then if they dig into it, then they'll get this extra information. And here is where it starts getting interesting. We have our basic castle grounds here, along with some extra buildings, but every single room is always reproduced on the page next to its description. I don't know if I've seen any other books do this. I can't think of any that I can recall off the top of my head, but it is a fantastic way to lay out an adventure, especially once we get into the main building here. So for example, each of these, you have the entry hall, that's where it is. And so this is the main thing you're talking about, so it's in bold, while all the other ones are in gray. But it always shows you any rooms that are adjacent to the main room. So you can always see what's around it. So if they decide to go through this room, you know that they're going to A2, you jump over to here, you have the basic information there, and then some more secret information if they examine things more closely. And then again, you have the main room along with everything that is touching it. This means that you never have to flip back to the main map. You only have to look at the map that's on that page, and you can immediately orient yourself. This is really cool, and it saves an enormous amount of time. Of course, it also takes up a whole bunch of extra space on the page. So that is a trade-off, that you're going to get a longer book with a lot of repetition of information. But in my opinion, anything that makes games faster to run is worth it. So sometimes we have these bigger maps right here. But again, everything that's over here is all right here. You never have to flip. We have a decent amount of interactability. We have some weird mirrors that you can mess around with. We have a second story here, along with staircases down to this larger hall on the bottom floor. We have a number of weird monsters that are tracing you around around this mansion as you explore it. And they essentially break down to Lumiere, Cogsworth, and the Beast. But just they're not called that. So here is, these are some of the underground levels, as you can see there. And then we start getting into the monsters at the back here. So there's the Master, the Beast. He's more insectile than like a mammal. We have a weird Cogsworth, where it's like a clock spider. Chandelier, it's like Lumiere. And basically the Boiler. I don't think that was in the movie, but maybe it was in something else. And some other weird monsters here. Now, one thing that I found was a little bit of a problem was the way that random encounters work. So it says that there aren't really random encounters here at the beginning. Instead you're using a deck of cards, which is a fun idea. And whenever a source of noise happens, then you can draw cards to see what happens. So you want to avoid causing noise as you explore this place. So when you assemble the deck, you take the Jack, Queen, King, and Ace of each suit and assemble them into 4 individual decks. And shuffle them separately. And it says the order of the decks will be, and then it doesn't tell you. I feel like something was missing there. Perhaps it means that this is the order of the decks, but even this is arranged in a square, so I'm not sure what order that's supposed to represent. Maybe it's like this, but it's not totally clear. When there was noise, draw cards from the starting deck until the Hunt card, the Ace, is drawn. Once it's drawn, add the next deck in order to the remaining cards and shuffle them. Okay, and it says cards that you draw are discarded. Until the creature associated with the suit is dead, their cards remain in play. So again, I'm not sure how these two things work together. You draw a card, and then you do what it says, and then you discard it, but it's still in play? Do you shuffle it back into the deck? There seems to be missing mechanics where I'm not totally following how it's going to work. And then the remainder of the information is at the back of the book, which I think was too bad. It would have been nice to have these 2 sections of these card rules together on the same page or in the same section. So you're drawing these things. So maybe you're drawing hearts. And again, you have 4 cards, right? Jack, Queen, King, Ace. But here, these are just numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? I assume this means Jack, Queen, King, and Ace, but it's not actually laid out like that. So it's, again, not as clear as it really could be. So I assume that if you draw like a queen, then number 2 is what happens. It just needs a little bit more work there, I think. And that's it for our the Touch of the Beast. Now, the last thing that we have here is pretty interesting. I believe this was done as part of a zine quest a while back. It's called the Crypt Collection. And this section, the dungeons, is a whole bunch of 1-page dungeons, or really they're more like 2-page dungeons. And they're all done by different authors. Most of them done by Zachary Cox, who's the main author of this whole line of books. But a lot of them are done by guest authors too. This thing right here is just a summary of the basic rules, so we can set that aside. So how each of these is designed, we have our sort of setting here, and then all of these little dungeons are spread around it, which is a fun idea. So you could have an adventure where you're traveling from one to the other and exploring all of them. We always have an initial page where you have an illustration and kind of a layout with some text and information like where the monsters are. And then the next 2 pages is a 1-page dungeon where all the information is on 1 page. That's really great. And then this kind of repeats throughout the rest of the book. We have kind of a hall to explore here. We have a laboratory. Some of these are more detailed, some of them are less so, which is totally fine. The lair of the Scorpion Masters. This is more like a little village that you're exploring. So some of these aren't quite dungeons, they're more like adventure locations. We have a small little building here. I suppose you could stick that in a city or something like that. Ma Island. Stick it out in the ocean. The one that I found especially great was there was a one near the end here by ZXCU, who has previously done the Thousand Islands setting, which I really like because his prose is so good. And that really comes through in this section, White Hair. And this definitely has a kind of a Southeast Asian feel to it, which fits with some of his other works. Basically, the idea here is that there is a dragon or a person cursed to be a kind of dragon, growing hair, enormous amounts of white hair everywhere. And this is spreading around throughout the land and causing problems. So we actually have a hex crawl here, which is really neat. I think it's the only adventure in here with this type of large overland setup. And then we have all these major locations set up here. We have encounters that you can run away, that you can encounter just by combining these 3 random tables. So you can encounter a pack of goats that is gaining on a grotto ghost, or a python made of hair shadowing from stealth a lone ewe. So you can immediately create encounters like that. It's very well written, it's very evocative, and it seems like it would be a lot of fun to run. In any case, this is just a lot of short little adventures that are very well laid out, and I think you could drop into any kind of setting very quickly. We also have a section on the back here for adapting monsters for D20 games. So that's it. Those are all these new Best Left Buried stuff. The thing that stands out to me the most is the layout in general, especially when it comes to the adventures and the dungeons. There is a lot of attention paid to either one-page dungeons, which I like, or in longer adventures like The Touch of the Beast, we have the setup where these rooms are always placed on the map, on the page, next to the description. So that page flipping is reduced down to 0. That's really great. Everyone should be doing stuff like that. At least I love the attention to detail and the dedication to making things easier for the game master, no matter what. So I'll put links down in the description to where you can check these out, either in PDF form or in print form if you prefer. And for our comment of the day, down below in the comments, why don't you try and create a new kind of skeleton? Skeletons are a standard trope in D&D, especially in horror type adventures, but they're a little bland. So take that model of a skeleton and try and create something weird and unusual with it. Let's see how many of those we can get down in the comments. I'll go through and put a heart on the ones that I think are especially cool. All right, that's it for today, everybody. See you down in the comments, and see you next time.